Cuba and Italy agreed to produce the Cuban anti-Covid-19 vaccine Soberano 2 in the European nation. Colombians rallied to mark the first anniversary of the social unrest caused by Ivan Duque's neoliberal reforms. Russia urges an impartial investigation of recent armed attacks in the autonomous region of Transnistria. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada, from the teleSUR studios in Caracas, Venezuela. We begin with the news. Stay with us. And now we begin. On Thursday, Cuba and Italy signed an agreement for the production of Cuban anti-Covid-19 vaccines in the European nation in the context of the Bio-Havana 2022 Congress. The Memorandum of Understanding signed between the Finlay Vaccine Institute, the Italian company Adien Pharma and Biotech, and the Italian Agency for Economic and Cultural Exchange with Cuba, AECEC, establishes the production in its final phase of the vaccine against COVID-19 Soberano 2. The general director of the Finlay Vaccine Institute, Vicente Veres, informed that the intention is to evaluate in the second phase this vaccine, as well as others of the institution that could be totally produced in Italian soil. This agreement is added to other cooperation mechanisms that these nations maintained during the COVID-19 pandemic. On Thursday, the agenda of the Prime Minister of Belize, John Antonio Briceño, advances in Cuba. The Premier of Belize will visit the Center for Genetic Engineering and Biotechnology, a leading company in Cuba that researches, produces, markets, and exports innovative products. In this context, Briceño will learn about the scientific results of the institution responsible for Abdala, the first vaccine against COVID-19 developed in Latin America and the Caribbean. According to the agenda, Briceño will also visit the Fidel Castro Ruz Center, whose objective is to disseminate, study, and research the thought and work of the historical leader of the Cuban Revolution. The National Association of Haitian magistrates requested the government to postpone the enforcement of the new penal code decreed in 2020. The judges sent a letter to Prime Minister Ariel Henry in which they asked to postpone the implementation of the law for at least 2 years or to dismiss it until experts can analyze its legal consequences. This ordinance, approved by a presidential decree in mid-2020, was the object of numerous criticisms for allegedly allowing amnesty to those accused of corruption, political and financial crimes, among other accusations. While magistrates call for the law's postponement, other voices point out that Henry does not have the prerogatives to dismiss a presidential decree. The Integration Congress is closing today in Venezuela with the presentation of a unique political document and an agenda that covers all the issues addressed. During the event, participants presented a declaration to get united for peace and call for the resolution of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, considering it a military bloc that responds to the war interests of the imperialism. The text also reflected the voices of women who were victims of human rights violations. Delegations of the 5 continents present at the event also approved a resolution of solidarity with African women and with the people of Latin America and the Caribbean. And the teachers' protest in Ecuador to demand a salary increase and quality education from the national government. Teachers began a mobilization to demand that the executive not intervene in the ruling of the Constitutional Court on the salary equalization approved by the Ecuadorian National Assembly. Likewise, the National Union of Educators, UNE, announced a great mobilization nationwide in the next few days if they do not receive an answer to their claims. For its part, the Metropolitan Transit Agency informed through its Twitter account that at least 2 avenues on the center of Guayaquil are blocked due to burnt tires, although so far no violence has been registered. And the Nicaraguan authorities presented on Wednesday the winter 2022 interinstitutional plan for the mitigation of the impact of hurricanes, floods, landslides, and mine collapses in the Central American country. The plan was presented at a press conference by Brigadier General Rogelio Flores, the director of the Civil Defense, who detailed that in the country there are 4,328 critical points sensitive to the occurrence of hurricanes, which put at risk the lives of more than 4 million people. The initiative was directed by President Daniel Ortega to contribute to the protection of communities in vulnerable conditions, mainly those living in the Caribbean coast, where in 2020 hurricanes Ida and Iota, categories 4 and 5 in the Saffir-Simpson scale, hit and caused severe damages.
The scope of this plan is to contribute to the safety of life and property, families and communities in vulnerable exposure. We also set as a goal in this plan the surveillance and monitoring of climatic elements in coordination with SINAPRED's management, with municipal authorities and community leaders, to develop processes of strengthening local and institutional capacities in a permanent manner to execute mitigation projects and eliminate critical points and risk areas.
In this context, the director of the Civil Defense of the Nicaraguan Army, Rogelio Flores, detailed the different risk scenarios that may occur in the country based on the experience of natural disasters that have occurred in the past.
When a climatic event occurs, either a sudden or a progressive one, and this happens mainly with the overflowing of rivers, and the three major scenarios that we have and that we have conceived, meaning in case of heavy rains, overflowing of rivers, landslides, sinking of mines, and hurricanes, when they impact directly on the national territory.
We'll take a short break now. Join us again after this. Welcome back to From the South. In Colombia are mobilizing themselves to commemorate 1 year since the social explosion caused by the implementation of the tax reform and other neoliberal policies by the government of Iván Duque. Just a year ago, social organizations rejected the government's maneuvers to implement tax reforms, which included basic products of the family basket, increasing the cost of gasoline and other services. The organizers of the event pointed out that the cities of Bogotá, Medellín, and Cali reported mobilizations from early hours. In this context, demonstrators raised their voices to demand changes from the government of Iván Duque, as well as the rejection of the systematic violence unleashed mainly in rural areas against farmers, indigenous and other communities.
Mechanisms were sought. Mechanisms have been exhausted with the national government. Local and departmental dialogue scenarios were sought. In view of the fact that we have not received attention, we are not given an effective response to the situation we are expressing in the territories. As reused in the different municipalities and departments, we need to go to the city of Bogotá emergency.
And the victims' organization, Mothers and Families of Disappeared Detainees, resumed the annual March of Silence to demand justice for the 197 victims of the military dictatorship. The march brought together victims and their families, activists, and ordinary Uruguayans, aiming to shine light on a dark and often ignored chapter of the 1972 to 1985 dictatorship, which was responsible for the disappearance of nearly 200 people. In an effort to galvanize public support ahead of the march, this year the victims' organization Mothers and Families of Disappeared Detainees launched an innovative campaign on social media, revealing the human tragedy of forcible disappearance and the deafening silence that often follows. The group's spokesperson, Ignacio Errandonea, said that they will insist on the state's responsibility for refusing to demand the armed forces to provide information on the repressive actions carried out during the dictatorship. And Argentine bank employees went on a national strike this Thursday after a call made by the Banking Association, an organization that considered inadmissible the latest increase proposals of the chambers of the sector in the framework of discussions to index wages and inflation. The head of the Bank Workers Union, Sergio Palacio, explained that workers were angry with the banks, which earned enough to come up with a proposal better than the one they made. At the same time, he maintained that the four employers' chambers of the sector continued not to listen to the workers, and that is why workers decided to go on a hours nationwide strike to force both the public and private banks to do something. The rejected proposal set a salary increase of 55% in 3 sections until November, with revision within the last quarter of the year or before in case of the macroeconomic conditions of the country change. Bank unions considered the offer sufficient. And we have more information. The United States House of Representatives passed a bill urging the executive to sell the yachts seized to Russian nationals. The bill, which passed on on Wednesday, urges President Joe Biden to sell the assets of Russian nationals to finance military aid to Ukraine. Although the legislation is not binding, having passed with 417 votes in favor and 8 against, the desire of the lower house for the executive to take such action. Meanwhile, early attempts to enact the bill were thwarted after lawmakers of the Foreign Affairs Committee and lawyers for the American Civil Liberties Union raised concerns that the legislation is contrary to the legal protections for individuals. Mobilizations are being prepared in 900 Iranian cities to commemorate the World Al-Quds Day on April 29th. Mobilizations will begin in the morning hours. On the occasion of the World Al-Quds Day, marches or public meetings will be held in more than 90 countries in compliance with the biosafety protocols enforced by COVID-19. The Iranian government pledged to show massive support to the Palestinian people to condemn the aggressions by Israel. The Islamic Development Coordination Council informed that more than 5,000 local and foreign journalists, photographers, and cameramen will broadcast the event. The call is also extended to people of various freedom-loving religions. And China urged the G20 to focus on its obligations and promote the recovery of the world economy and avoid politicization of international financial cooperation. Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin called on the G20 to make positive contributions to the current geopolitical situation, which generates uncertainty and affects the ideals of growth and the nations of the world. The diplomat also indicated that the bloc and the international community need to remain united and cooperate in order to overcome the world's challenges and protect global stability. And we have more news coming up after a final short break, so stay with us.
In a world that doesn't stop, we give you space to keep up to date. Take a moment, breathe, and take care of your physical and mental health. Balance your well-being and guide your body. Only on teleSUR.
Welcome back to From the South. The Russian Foreign Ministry urged an impartial investigation into the recent armed attacks on facilities and infrastructure in the autonomous region of Transnistria. The spokesperson of the Russian diplomacy, Maria Zakharova, said that they are alarmed by the escalation of tensions in the autonomous Moldovan region of Transnistria and stressed that such actions are interpreted as terrorist attacks aimed at destabilizing the regional situation. Zakharova condemned the attempts of drag Transnistria into what is happening in Ukraine and called for an impartial and thorough investigation of all the circumstances.
We regard these actions as acts of terrorism aimed at destabilizing the situation in the region and expect a thorough and objective investigation of all the circumstances of what happened. We strongly condemn attempts to involve Transnistria in what is happening in Ukraine.
And Russia warns that Western arms shipments to Ukraine threaten Europe's security. According to the Kremlin spokesperson Dmitry Peskov, the entry of arms into Kiev from other countries are actions that threaten the security of the continent and generate instability. In this regard, the Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov assured that any arms shipment to Ukraine will become a legitimate military target for the Russian armed forces. In this line, the Russian Ministry of Defense detailed that the military attacks are not aimed at civilian facilities, but they seek to disable the war infrastructure of nationalists and Ukrainian soldiers. Several locations in Poland were left without gas supplies due to sanctions imposed by Warsaw on companies linked to Russia. The authorities in the municipality of Miaskisowo acknowledged that residents lack heating, hot water and gas for cooking food. The mayor of that town, Przemysław Ren, said that they are working to restore service as soon as possible. A similar scenario is unfolding in the Polish municipalities of Leba and Zagorov. This situation comes after Poland imposed sanctions against Russian companies Gazprom and Novatek, including the local subsidiary of Novatek Green Energy, which involved freezing assets. Sri Lanka was paralyzed on Thursday by a general strike called by 100 unions to demand the resignation of President Gotabaya Rajapaksa. More than 100 unions, including some affiliated with the ruling Sri Lanka Podujana Pramuna Party, called for a day-long strike on Thursday. Rajapaksa and his clan are accused of being responsible for the worst economic crisis in the country since independence in 1948. The government also announced on April 12 that it will stop paying its $51 billion foreign debt and opened negotiations with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout. Now we move on to other topics. Brazil was responsible for 40% of the planet's forest destruction in 2021, in which 1.5 million hectares of native forests were destroyed. According to a scientific article by the National Space Research Institute, part of the Amazon now acts as a new source of carbon, as human activity reduced the forest's capacity to absorb it. An area equivalent to a soccer field of rainforest was destroyed every 6 seconds on the planet, and most of it occurred in the Brazilian territory. According to studies by Global Forest Watch, the GFW, the World Resources Institute, the WRI, and the University of Maryland, the rainforest is losing its resilience, and parts of it could reach a critical breaking point. And an immense layer of foam coming out from polluted river has reached the doors of the homes of locals in Mosquera, a town 22 kilometers from the Colombian capital, Bogota. Residents are increasingly distressed by this phenomenon, which, although not new, has increased in the rainy season. It was a full smell, and the winds are quickly dispersing the contaminated foam to the neighborhood of Los Puentes, located in the riverbank. The environmental authority in the area said through its press office that the contaminated foam is increasing the number of detergents being poured in rivers, in addition to the recent rains. Since 2020, a wastewater treatment plant has been in operation in Mosquera, which, according to the locals, have done a poor waste management since its creation.
The smell is terrible. We have had to put up with the smell for a long time, and now with this big foam, we are afraid that we will be in danger. God forbid someone falls in there. We won't be able to find them. Several companies that discharge their water into the river It is the amount of chemicals that makes the foam like this.
This is the result of contamination. This is a result of the poor management of waste, which we were talking about. And what is collected by the land, such as materials, dead animals, and also the rubbish we throw away, grease, detergents, which is what generates all this contamination as we see in the foam.
And like this, we have come to the end of this news brief. But remember, you can find this and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And also, if you feel so inclined, please join us on social media for all the latest news. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Telegram. For Telesur English, I'm your anchor, Gladys Quesada. Thank you for watching.